Hello, BookTube. By random chance, this has been a very comic book heavy week for me here on BookTube. On Monday, I helped David Wiley inaugurate a little feature on his channel, Mutant Mondays, where we talk about the X-Men on Mondays. He seems okay with the fact of me elbowing my way in and just sort of hanging around at Professor Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters whenever he does that. So I ended up talking about mutants on Monday. And then on Tuesday, I talked about the Superman family, because Roy Reads Anything was reading through a copy of Superman Family number 171, and has intimated that perhaps he will do that again for May. There were backup stories that I had to talk about. And then Wednesday was Epic Comic Book Wednesday, the granddaddy of them all, where Michael K. Vaughan and I talk about comic books. A rousing two-part examination of the whole concept of continuity in comic books. What do you do with continuity in comic books? Lots and lots of fun. For the 2 or 3 people who are interested in comic books at all. Michael and I have noticed for years now that our comic book videos don't do well in terms of views, which it might make you think that I wouldn't indulge myself, that I wouldn't, as the kids say, lean in to a comic book themed week. But if I'm going to have 3 videos, I'm certainly going to do a 4th. So we're going to indulge in Thorsday. This is Thursday, and the mighty Thor is my favorite Marvel comic book character. One old friend of mine, years and years ago, used to say, okay, so no matter what the superhero comic book industry, you're going to pick the strongest guy with a red cape, and he's going to be your favorite character. I vigorously resist that idea. I like Superman and Superboy because of how great characters they are, and I like Thor because I like Norse mythology long before I read comic books. Or maybe at the same time, as I learned to love comic books. I love Thor's comic. I didn't like it when it started. It was clearly meant to be a ripoff of Captain Marvel. It was clearly meant to be, can I get around to changing my identity before I die? And it was poorly drawn by Stan Lee's brother. It was poorly written. Stan Lee wasn't paying much attention to it. And then, as Stan Lee got more confidence as a writer and started to feel his oats a little more, he started to realize some of the mythic potential in this character that he created to be just a superhero. And then Thor got really good. There's an era of Stan Lee drawing and Jack Kirby doing the artwork with Vinnie Coletta inks that is incredible, just incredible. Then that faltered, as runs always do. Every discussion of superhero comic books, inevitably it has to deal with runs, which is a stretch on some title that is better than the norm of that title. That's as simple a definition as you need. There was a run of Lee and Kirby on Thor that was terrific, absolutely epic. And then it faltered a little. Stan Lee was starting to phase out his active writing ability, his tour at Marvel, and Jack Kirby was doing lazier and lazier work. It was getting poorer and sloppier as the reins changed hands. And then the reins did change hands, and it wasn't that long. It was only about half a year, before Thor had another run with John Buscema doing the artwork and really, really doing great stuff. That Thor's had a lot of really great runs. That run with Buscema lasted for years and years, and there have been others. But when you ask a comic book fan about the Mighty Thor, the comic book The Mighty Thor, and you bring up the subject of runs, unless they are really old and can really remember the joy of reading the Lee and Kirby years, they're going to think of one thing only. They're going to think of Walt Simonson, a writer and artist who had done Thor before. He did a great run of Thor, heavily inked, and then came back. He came back to the title and eased his way into being the writer and the artist on the Mighty Thor. And I'm not saying that it's a requirement to have a great run, that all the creative ability in the title be in the hands of one person. Obviously, Lee and Kirby defy that, where it isn't true. There's also a great run decades and decades ago on Doctor Strange, where it was very much the writer and the artist. The artist was Gene Colan, that created a great run. So I'm not saying it has to be the same person, but a lot of things that we think of as great runs in comics are the result of one person doing the writing and the art at the same time. And Walt Simonson came back to Thor and had a run on Thor that most comic book fans even will say is far and away the best thing that has ever been done on the title. It was made into a gigantic hardcover omnibus of the type that Michael K. Vaughan really likes. I had that omnibus once upon a time. I earnestly wanted it. I waited for it. Then it came out, and it was $150 or something like that. And I said, no, I don't think so. I could just hear Miss Sainted Ma's voice in my head saying, $150 for a funny book. So I didn't do it. But then a couple of years later, it was remaindered at my comic shop for $50, and I did do that and thought, wow, this is great. I waited, I got it, it's finally here in a nice, beautiful hardcover, and I never used it. It was just too heavy. It was too awkward to use. And Marvel has been very, very careful about reprinting the Simonson run. They've never, as to the best of my knowledge, they've never reprinted that omnibus hardcover. So the original of that omnibus hardcover, which I think had an original piece of artwork on the cover by Simonson, is probably mind-bogglingly expensive on eBay. And they've never, as far as I know, done an Epic collection, the paperback reprint line of any of that. But Simonson stuck around for a while. His run is long. That hardcover omnibus of his run on Thor is big. It's a big thing. He was clearly enjoying himself, so much so that he stuck around writing and doing layouts, some art instruction, whatnot, even after he stopped being directly involved with the artwork himself. And that's the issue that we're looking at today for Thorsday. We're looking at the Mighty Thor number 380 from the 1980s, when all the world made sense. And this is the cover. It's a Walt Simonson cover. But the interior artwork is Simonson doing the layouts. He knew exactly what he wanted this to look like. But Sal Buscema, John Buscema's brother, does a lot of the finishes in here. And it's a great issue all by itself. Now, you're going to notice something right away, which is, if you're not familiar with Thor, you're going to notice something right away, which is where he's wearing head-to-toe armor. And the reason for that is that at this period in Thor's continuity, there's that word again, Hela, the Norse goddess of death, had cursed him. She'd put a curse on him. She couldn't kill him outright, but she put a curse on him that his body would suddenly be human. His body would be fragile by immortal standards. So although he wouldn't die, if in his superhero activities, if something hit him, something like the wrecking ball of the Wreckers crew, or a giant, or a troll, or a heavy weight or something, it would seriously injure him. He broke his arm earlier in this period of the run when Sal Buscema was doing the artwork, and had to forge a metal brace for his arm in order to make it work as a kind of Iron Man type thing, because his arm wasn't going to heal. Hela's curse was that he could suffer injury and that he would not heal from it, with her idea being that eventually, living the life you lead, you'll be just this withered, crippled husk in eternal pain forever. And eventually that did start to happen. Thor kept fighting criminals. He kept fighting Norse giants and whatnot, and kept sustaining injuries until finally he realized, I need to forge a suit of armor to sustain my broken body. And that's what this is. He's wearing that armor, but he very much still has that curse. And sure enough, in the midst of that curse, in other words, Thor at his most vulnerable, he deals in this issue with his ultimate foe, the Midgard serpent, Jormungand, the Midgard serpent, who is a figure from Norse mythology, the serpent that circles the world, and that is fated in Norse mythology to be not only Thor's most formidable enemy, but his last one. In the Battle of Ragnarok that ends the lives of the old Norse gods, Thor fights Jormungand and dies. He kills Jormungand, but he dies himself as a result of it. So this is Thor's ultimate enemy. And he appears in the previous issue to this one in the form of one of the gigantic monsters that Stan Lee loved to write comics about. Mike Vaughan is the only living fan of the monster comics, but once upon a time they kept the lights on at the precursor to Marvel Comics, and Stan Lee loved to write those. And one of the monsters that he invented was Fin Fang Foom. And in the previous issue of this one, Fin Fang Foom reveals himself to be the Midgard serpent. He just zips himself open and pops out, confronting Thor. Just there, I think, in Central Park. This is very much another example of the kind of continuity problems that we were discussing yesterday, because this battle takes place within earshot of New York. If you were following continuity to its logical outcome, there's no way that Thor would fight the Midgard serpent outside of New York by himself. He'd be surrounded by heroes in no time at all. In fact, he might call for their help. But instead, in this issue, like most good continuity, pretends there are no other heroes in the world, just Thor. An embattled Thor. A Thor who knows how vulnerable he is. And it turns out in the course of this issue that Jormungand knows that as well. I want to see if I can find Yes, we have this great panel because this whole issue is done in splash panels. The whole thing is. Uh, so not 9 panels, not 4 panels or anything like that. It's all full page panels. Look at that! Isn't that incredible? And Jormungand actually he's not just a beast. He's able to think, and he says, "For if Thor cannot die, how shall his ancient nemesis Jormungand perish? I must admit, I was taken unawares by your newly acquired plumage. But gleaming feathers do not give victory, and birds are only mismanaged reptiles. You will never shine as brightly as a true serpent. Besides, you resemble in nothing so much as the invertebrates upon which I have feasted at the ocean's bottom. When I have reduced your skeleton to dust, I will shell you and suck your marrow. Then you shall live forever in the belly of the beast." Because Jormungand knows that Thor is vulnerable, but Thor is still going to fight. Whomp, like that, with the hammer like that. He's still going to fight. And he's still going to talk out loud to himself, like heroes always do. Jormungand is too powerful to be injured easily. Yet the might of Mjolnir, that's the name of this issue, is Thor's hammer. This issue is called Mjolnir's Song. And as you're going to see, Simonson is very much chronicling it along the lines of an Old Norse saga. Thor says, "Yet the might of Mjolnir in the hand of Thor is the might of Asgard unfettered, and the fighting heart of Thor shall know no surrender." Look, the Jormungand's fall is blasting trees out of the ground. And the fight is on. Jormungand knocks Thor against a hillside. Look at that. That's all one panel. And you can see what I'm talking about here because the narration shifts to verse. It shifts to Norse-style verse. "Neither asked quarter, neither cried enough. Their weirds held them bound as chains to the wheel. In their fury they tore Midgard asunder, hatred alive forever in their terrible foes. The earth trembled at Thor's touch. Drenched with blood and fire, the fearful sun hid its face, locked in fate's embrace. They had no hope of victory, only glory and doom." Needless to say, no one was writing anything like that in comics, and you wouldn't get away with that if you were just a writer. You would be running that by an editor. An artist wouldn't know what to make of that. But if you're in a run, and everybody knows it, and by this time, by issue number 380, everybody knew what Simonson on Thor was like. Everybody did. Inside the Marvel offices and outside in fandom, everybody knew this was going to be immortal work, that this was one of the greatest runs on this character. Marvel's editorial offices were getting flooded with letters to that effect, so no editor was going to do anything about this. Jormungand taunts Thor with the kind of metaphysical observations that Simonson loved to work in on his run in Thor. Jormungand, see, he's rearing up there. We don't even see Thor, just a shattered mountain. Jormungand is rearing up and says, "You are a fool, Thor. You might have avoided this fight for centuries if you'd been sensible. But no, Hela curses you and suddenly you think it's hero time. Before we finish here, I shall make you a believer in that delightful mortal notion that death is only the beginning of eternal life. You shall long for death and live forever. That's the trouble with godhood. It robs you of your finer judgment. A deity so rarely has to pay for his mistakes. I have read the pitiful fragments of mortal legends that survive, telling of the battle between us at the end of time. We are fated to slay each other, godling. In fact, I shall die first, and you shall take 9 steps before dying yourself. Truly, mortals are the most incorrigible fabulous. Yet here I am in full flower of my glory, while you wear an iron skin to protect yourself and challenge me to battle. Little godling, I shall inscribe your name upon the finest tombstone imaginable. In New York City, I shall erect a cairn comprised of shattered buildings." And then the final comment from Jormungand, paused me when I was rereading this. He says, "The World Trade Center is not too small a monument for Thor of Asgard." That's how we all thought, especially how New Yorkers thought. Those 2 towers there at the end of the street will be there forever. They'll survive, as they do in the movie Deep Impact, a gigantic tidal wave where the wave is taller than they are. Lots of other things will be destroyed. The Statue of Liberty will be destroyed, but they'll survive. But anyway, Thor absolutely refuses. He absolutely refuses that kind of doomsaying. Look at the line work here. You've got the motion lines for the hammer in flight, but you've also got motion lines flying out from the center of the hammer. Incredibly dramatic. It's just incredibly dynamic. It smashes into Jormungand. That is just a whole panel with nothing but sound effect. That's all. And the hammer whistles back to Thor, and we get a little more poetic narration. as Jormungand the Midgard serpent rears up and flies away, and Thor is chasing it right away. We get this sequence that you just know Simonson had in his mind, where Jormungand eats Thor and then gets his teeth blasted out. As the Thor contemplates what is going to happen here, he knows the danger that he's in, but he can't help it. Jormungand is taunting him still, even with broken teeth. Jormungand is taunting him and saying, this is your doom. And they rush towards each other. Look at that artwork. That is just incredible. Just amazing. They rush towards each other for one cataclysmic encounter. And on his way, Thor responds to the cynical comments of Jormungand. I want to read this to you because this is awesome. You said it yourself, Jormungand. The trouble with godhood is that it robs you of your finer judgment. And that is why we will never be the same. You are a mighty fighter, but in the end you are only a selfish creature, while heroes have an infinite capacity for stupidity. Thus are legends born. Heroes have an infinite capacity for stupidity. They smash into each other and seem to destroy each other. Because Jormungand is reeling off, severely wounded, but Thor appears to be atomized. There's nothing in that armor anymore. The impact with his age-old enemy has reduced him to jelly. So we Thor fans, when we were reading issue number 380, we knew perfectly well that no matter what, this storyline had reached its climax. It's one thing if Thor in one issue is wearing an arm brace. It's another thing if Thor in one issue is wearing bright blue and gold armor. But Thor reduced to jelly inside his empty armored shell means we have reached a climax here. It's fitting that it's the Midgard serpent that brings it about. But we have reached the climax here. Something is going to happen with this cursed version of Thor. And it does. And maybe we'll get to that when Michael K. Vaughan and I talk about the Mighty Thor. But I wanted to do this, Thor number 380, to continue the comic theme for Thorsday. And tomorrow, well, is it possible that tomorrow will be Fantastic Friday? I think it's likely. If I'm going to have a theme, I'm going to pursue it until it's dead. So I will wrap this up for now, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.